Jackson on the drive, kicks it out for Man. Man, three-pointer, bang! Oh, what a man!
Magic down the middle, just what I thought. A hook shot at 12, good!
Here's Michael at the foul line, a shot on Elo, good! The Bulls win! They win!
Now there's a steal by Marin. Underneath the DJ,
Going up over Bell, ball away. Yes! Yes! At the buzzer, he does it! Was there ever a doubt?
A Smith screen, Posey will defend. Oh! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
It's a physical game.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to a special episode of Dime Dropper. I don't know what to call these episodes yet, but an episode where we delve into a time in history, whether it's a team or an era, and it's going to be along my historic timeline. For this episode, we are going to be talking about what I think is the greatest rivalry that you never hear about between the Baltimore Bullets and the New York Knicks in the late 60s and early 70s, but we're only going to be talking about the first half of it, when Earl The Pearl Monroe was still a member of the Baltimore Bullets. Joining me today, I'm really excited. Obviously, Fabian, who you guys are familiar with, who joined me on one of these kind of episodes when we talked about the mellow era of the New York Knicks. But thankfully, and I'm really excited to be joined by, hopefully, one of the first of multiple appearances by two of the most knowledgeable people that I've ever come across talking basketball and hoops. Dr. Hawk, who we're joined by, you'll hear him vocally, but you don't see his face today. And also my Jason as well, who is currently writing a book on the ABA, and we'll give you his background on the hoops. But I'm super excited to be joined by these guys. They have so much knowledge of the game. Everybody, thanks for joining me today. I'm really excited about this.
Hey, thanks for having us. Of course, Don.
So I guess we can start with Doc and Jason. Just introduce, since it's your first time on Dime Dropper. I know you guys are always in the spaces, but the first time on the YouTube channel and the podcast. So let people know, what's your background? How did you guys get all this knowledge? Because you guys have an answer to everything about this era.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jay.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, I was lucky enough to grow up in New York in the 60s. So, I came of age right when the Knicks got good. And we're going to talk about that era. That's my era. So I just think I was really fortunate that I was exposed to, what was just a really beautiful brand of basketball, and the city just went crazy right when I was old enough to get it. Where I was a sports fanatic as a kid, and then all of a sudden the city just popped off. The Mets, the Knicks, the Jets, it was crazy. And I was right in the middle of it, just thinking this is awesome. And the Knicks were, I don't know, they kind of owned the city for a while there. And so I just fell in love with basketball and played all the time and watched as many games as I could, listen to Marv Albert. I think I was lucky there too. I got one of the great voices. So I think all of that was the start of it. And then I just followed it and watched it and started writing about it a couple years out of college, and then made my way up through different places, wrote for a lot of different magazines. Ended up at Basketball Digest for a number of years, being their West Coast guy. So all the way up through about 2004, doing a lot of writing about the league, talking to guys. And then since then, just kept up connections and kept up watching. I love the game. So then talked to a lot of ABA guys in the last 5 years for a project I'm doing on the ABA, and that was really educational for me. I was aware of the ABA, saw some games on TV, but it was kind of a mystery. So I wanted to learn about it, and I did, and I am. And those guys love to talk, and they have some unbelievable stories. So, I've talked to a lot of players, watched millions of games, and still enjoy it.
There we go, right on. So what I love also about this dynamic is we have Jason from the New York side, grew up as a Knicks fan. We have Fabian, who was a Knicks fan a little bit later. And then we have Dr. Hawk, who's from the Baltimore and Maryland area. So he was a Bullets fan growing up. So this is awesome.
Absolutely.
Poor guy.
Give us your background, Doc. How'd you get into the game?
Well, I'll tell you, I started playing when I was about 6 or 7 years old. Always read about the game. Dad always had a lot of books around the house, Sports Illustrated, things like that, and then textbooks as well. And when I was a kid, I was always wanted to read books that had pictures in them. If it didn't have a picture in it, I didn't want to read it. But one day, my pops, after he knew I'd been watching the NBA and started getting into it and playing the game, he knew I could keep he could keep my attention span, or I would keep my attention span, and he handed me this one book called Foul by Connie Hawkins. It had about 400 pages, and I was maybe in the 3rd or 4th grade, and he said, "Why don't you read this book?" And I said it in my childhood vernacular. I said, "Well, Pop, that don't even have no pictures in it, man." And he said, "Read it." He said, "You will enjoy it." So I flipped forward to the part where Connie was in the ABA, because the ABA, as Jason stated, I was intrigued by it because it was mystery. You always heard about the NBA and the NBA stars, but there was this mystery going on about who are these ABA guys, who are these vagabonds, and who are these guys that I've never heard of, or at least I can't see on television. So I got into that end. But growing up in Baltimore, when I was there in the early 70s growing up and really was starting to get into sports, the Colts were there. They had won a Super Bowl in 70, 71. Baltimore was up and coming and loaded, as we'll get into. And then you had the Orioles, who had won the World Series, I think once at that point, but were always contenders. And so you would see these guys everywhere, particularly in Baltimore County. And they're always accessible, always friendly. And as I started to just move along and get a little older, I was always reading books about sports, and then that turned into writing. The funny thing about it was, I remember a couple of my cousins, they used to tease me. They said, "Well, you read a lot." They said, "Well, all you read is those damn basketball books or whatever." But reading those books and reading them on another level at such a younger age put me on a higher reading plane, taught me how to write, taught me how to tell stories, and it parlayed into what I do today. Even though I am a physician today, if I had not gone to medical school, I would have been a journalist. And like I tell people, I would have been Brian Gumbel with a little bit of swag. So I would have taken his job. But as it turns out, one of my mentors told me, he said, "You can walk and chew gum at the same time." And so in spite of the fact that I function as a physician and a medical consultant, I also write probably 2 articles per month. I don't write short articles. I'm not a journalist. I write pieces and opinion pieces that, it takes a little bit of work to put in, but I get it done. So I write for the Hub.news. I'm doing something in conjunction with Vanderbilt, their sports initiative about sports and society. And then I've been writing for narrative.com, African American Studies in their sports division, for about close to a year. I've probably written about 26 articles in there. So I enjoy it. Writing requires that you read. Getting in spaces like this also requires that you read and stay current. So that's about all I can tell you about me as it applies to this.
So that's beautiful. I want to tell my subscribers, guys, Dr. Hawk wrote an amazing piece on the great Spencer Haywood. You guys should all check it out, especially if you're watching Winning Time or you follow me, because I've made Instagram posts and various posts on Spencer Haywood, and that's just the beginning. Because when he gets to the NBA, hopefully we'll get a lot more footage of him that I can talk about and share. So let's get right into it. First, before I want to get to the specifics of this specific rivalry, and by the way, for anybody watching, yes, everybody knows I'm a Clipper fan, so I'm okay with the double dipping here. I got my Washington Bullets hat that I got from the Verizon Center in DC, and I got the Knicks shirt that I got from MSG. So 2 of the stadiums I've been to, so I've seen both these franchises in their locations, so it's awesome for me. But I didn't know all this history when I went to these places, so I want to talk about the state of the league in the 60s, though. A lot of people have these narratives about the 60s, and the players weren't athletic. It was all white dudes. There was not much skill outside of, like, the big guys, Oscar Robertson, Wilt Chamberlain, Jerry West, Bill Russell. And, studying the whole decade, and now I'm done studying the whole decade. I'm on to the early 70s now. I just found out how many false, there's the amount of false perceptions and narratives out there about the 60s, the amount of talent there really was. But I guess I'll start with Jason, the state of the league in the 60s, and I want to give Fabian a chance if you want anything to add on or ask, or maybe how were the 60s talked about when you were a kid and growing up in the 90s? Because when I hear about the 60s, there were plumbers, there were part-time workers, these guys weren't that good, all this stuff, no context about anything. So your mic is muted.
You hear me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It was the same exact way you were saying it, but now calling it plumbers and mailmen and whatever, that was Twitter who put the twist on it. But we did disrespect the old school, and there is always that factor that, you know, when you're young, you think you're the new best hot toy in the world, and you think the world's gonna end in your new generation thinks the world's gonna end in their generation. So everything in the past, evolution took place. There's no way, you know, it was ever better than this, especially in the 60s, when if you look back on it, because of the dominance of, when you look at Bill Russell, and you see he won 11 championships, and then you say, well, it was probably like 10 teams back then, and it couldn't have been that much competition. But, you know, I can't lie. As when I met Dime Dropper and we got closer, then Jason and Dr. Hawk gets involved. It's like it makes it way harder to ever speak from that point of view, but there's still remnants of it for me, because you still have the ABA, you still have the Harlem Globetrotters. So it's somewhere in the middle and more towards what you guys put me on to, because there's an education involved about reality. Look, whoever didn't make it for whatever reason, but there was still greatness involved. You still have to be great. You still have to show up and be a professional. And we can have tons of several examples of how to not be a professional that is hot in the media right now in the NBA. So I would imagine that someone like a Will Chamberlain back then was kind of like in the middle, where he was enjoying being a star, and we still see that today. But at the same time, he's still Will Chamberlain, and he's a legend for that reason. So my generation did the same thing, Don. We were very disrespectful, and almost demeaned the accomplishments of a Will Chamberlain or a Bill Russell.
Well, and you know, I think with those two particular guys, before I hand it off to Jason, those two particular guys are very easy to try to poke holes through in terms of their resumes if you don't really know the circumstances. Because when you hear 11 championships, you automatically want to poke holes through that. Like, you're like, okay, how is that possible? And then when you see Wilt Chamberlain's stats, you're like, okay, there's got to be something like here. Like, so everybody wants to, you know, poke holes through these guys' resumes. And I think a large reason is because we don't talk about the competition they face. So I'm going to hand it off to Jason. Give us what the league was really like in the 60s. How good was the competition relative to what is told now? And, you know, what about the unfairness to black players and how that evolved? So I'm going to hand it off to you.
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I know, my bad. I should have gone one at a time there.
We got like an hour for those questions.
Yeah.
Got to write a dissertation.
I think one thing that I've kind of looked back on, you know, I didn't really think about it at the time, but now when you think about it, there were 8 teams for most of the 60s.
No, I think it was the 9th team was the Chicago Packers, I believe, in 61-62.
Okay, so 9 and then 10. So basically for the decade, you're talking about 9 or 10 teams. Mm. And in those days, the benches almost never played.
Yeah.
So I think that's
important. Rotations.
It's important to know as well. And we'll talk about that with this series, because, man, did guys put up big minutes. But they all did. All the stars did. That was the game. And so you're really looking at, let's say you got 10 teams, and you got maybe 7 guys on each team that play. That's 70 guys. That's it. And so you're playing against, other than the guys who did make it into the league for various reasons, you're playing against the best guys every night. There is no night off. And I think that's it. I mean, if you think about it now, if you want to just look at it now, there's 28 teams, 30 teams?
30 teams, yeah.
Okay, 30. If you were to knock that down to 10, right? How good are those 10 teams?
Insane.
They're insane. They're all all-star teams. Now, that was not the case back then. There's more players now, but it's important to kind of think about that, because these teams were loaded. Mm-hmm. And partly for that reason. There's only that many jobs. That was it.
That's what Bill Russell said to Michael Jordan. You know, he was saying that,
It's true. I mean, you can't get around that. And it wasn't like there was, until the ABA came, there wasn't like, you know, there were a lot of guys out there that could really play. There were a lot of African-American players who were denied their chance. We don't know how many, you know, I think maybe out of those 70, probably another 20 would have been African-American players who were better than the bottom 20, at least. So if you look at that, the league would have been even better. It was really good, and the level was really high. It would have been even higher.
And especially those guys you talk about when you talk about guys even past those 7 players that are playing, a lot of those guys at the end of the bench were just white guys that were fillers, right?
And that's important to know that the quota was very real, and Doc can talk about this too, but it was, four black guys on the team was it. Really, only Red Auerbach broke that because he wanted to win. He didn't care. He wanted to win. He was smart. And he said, if I roll out this squad, they can't beat me. And they couldn't. And I think that's important to look at too. But it's true. It's kind of funny when you look at it. But, I mean, he had, 5 of his top 7 rotation guys were almost always black guys. They were much more athletic than the rest of the league, and they ran the league to death. That's not an accident.
Yeah.
No. That's just not. It's just smart. And nobody else caught on. Nobody was willing because, it was questionable in those days. There was a lot of fan issues, and owners were really scared of putting too many black guys out there, and they didn't. And they got beat because of it over and over again. Anyway, so that's a big part of it. And there were no nights off. I mean, there were very few really bad franchises that stayed bad. So, you had to bring it every night. I think it's important to know how tough the travel was then. Mm-hmm. The travel was impossible. They took trains. They took like propeller planes. It was nasty. They played 5 games in 7 nights in canvas shoes with no trainer.
Yes.
I'm not making this up. I mean,
I know. I'm with you.
He's not making this up. Think about that. I mean, these guys today, they can't play 3 games in a week without taking a game off, and they only play 35 minutes a game.
Yep.
Wilt Chamberlain averaged over 48 minutes a game one year.
Absolutely.
Over. I mean, so, it was a tougher job in those days, a much, much tougher job. And also, these guys, if you were hurt, you were supposed to play, period. And if you were a star, you absolutely had to play unless you couldn't walk. And that's also important to know. And a lot of guys got hurt, because of course you do, came back too soon because you had to, and then were hurt the rest of their career. And that's why the careers were shorter, because the medical care was terrible. And guys were coming back too soon and playing hurt and continuing to play hurt. And that's just what you did. That was a given. That was not, if you didn't, you were out of the league. You were called, oh, that guy's weak, he's gone, and nobody wanted him. And you were literally gone. That's it. If you refused to play, or you told the medical staff, no, I need another 2 weeks, and they had somebody, whoever it was, some hack doctor that said, no, he can play, and you didn't, you were gone. They cut you, and your career was over. Nobody would pick you up. So think about that. I mean, that's a big, big thing. And so I think it was a man's game in those days. You had to be tough as hell, very physical. And so, yeah, the state of the league was interesting. It was small. The league office had like 4 people. It was kind of a minor league. Baseball was the sport. Football was coming up. Basketball was kind of in the backwater. They didn't draw a lot of fans. So it was a different sport, different time. But, you had to be there, and you had to bring it, and you had to play strong and tough every night, or you were out.
Doc, you got anything to add on? And we can also talk about how, approaching the era that we're about to talk about, how one thing I really noticed, though, is when you look at like 1955 and then you look at 1965, 1966, when we're just talking about like the amount of black players, it looks like a totally different league. Like even by 1966 in the late 60s, you had a lot of like, I think the other teams were like, okay, we got to start matching the Celtics with this a little bit or something.
Yeah, if you get beat every year, at a certain point, you got to turn it out. Well, when was Earl Lloyd? When was his first game? He's the first black player. That was in 50,
like 55, something like that.
55, I think. Chuck Cooper, those guys. So I mean, you didn't even have black players in the league till the mid 50s.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's be clear here. So obviously a completely different league in the 40s or 50s. George Mike and all, it was all white guys. So that, to me, that doesn't even count.
Yeah, that's why people get it twisted. They act like Mike and Russell played like in the same time, and it's totally different.
Absolutely. They lump them all. They lump them all together, man.
So go for it, Doc.
Yeah.
Or Fabian has anything.
I'll tell you this, and I think we talked about this. I remember I was walking the dogs. My wife had one dog, I had the other, and the phone kept going in and out, and it was in the wintertime. And I said something about that Paul Silas quote. And I'll say it again regarding the state of the league. And this is around the time when the Bullets and the Knicks started to come up. And it's about the preference of keeping the white fans happy and keeping them in the seats. And I remember what Paul Silas said, and I'm quoting. He said, Baltimore keeps a lot of black dudes. San Francisco don't. He said Atlanta has all black starters, so they try to get white dudes for the bench. And I can remember where I was sitting when I read that for the first time, and I immediately went and picked up 2 annual basketball magazines, and I picked up a book that had the rosters, and lo and behold, it coincided with what he said. San Francisco, every year in the 60s, you looked at the roster, and you had Thurman, and you had Al Annals, you had Nate Thurman, and you had Joe Ellis. And the other brothers came and went. Matter of fact, my wife's cousin played for them briefly. His name was Bill Turner. Numbers retired at Akron. But that was their core. And then you looked at Baltimore. Baltimore had brothers up and down the roster by that time. And Unseld, they had Gus, they had Ray Scott, they had Earl Monroe. I mean, they had gone through Bellamy and Jim Barnes and that crew and Eddie Miles. But there were other cities, and he was making reference to Phoenix, where he was at the time, where, okay, we got to keep fans in the seats, so we got to do what we can to have some white stars. That was real. Going back to what Jason was saying about the talent level in the league, I want to tell you something that Wilt Chamberlain said from way back in the day. When you had 8 or 10 teams, that shouldn't be seen as a for lack of a better term, a black mark on the league in terms of how talented or how rough it was. It was harder, because you didn't have a weak link you were going to go to. Oh, we're going to play Cincinnati tonight. Oh, we're going to play the St. Louis tonight. We're going to go to this guy. We're going to funnel the ball to that guy. You didn't have any weak links. Everybody could play, and to give you a perfect example of that, when Chicago came in as an expansion team, expansion teams always dilute the talent momentarily, but then they catch up. But Chicago came in as an expansion team in '66. And because of the talent level in the league, everybody has to leave a certain number of players unprotected. Guess what? That team made the playoffs its first year as an expansion
and that
team.
also came after they extended it to 4 teams in each division make the playoffs that year.
Yes.
Right.
So, the talent level was there. Wilt was going against. I always see in Twitter, well, he didn't go against any other 7-footer. Somebody wrote, I think a couple of weeks ago, he never went against a guy over 6'8". I'm like, come on, man, you don't know what you're talking about. Just take a peek at a roster and read something, and you'll understand that that's a weak statement. The forwards were strong on every team. The guards were strong. It was just I could name names all day. But my point is that when you don't have that expansion and that dilution of talent, then it's tough. You don't get any nights off. You got to come to play. And in terms of toughness and the injuries, Jason's correct. It was no load management. You don't want to play? Well, guess what? Before the ABA, we'll ship your ass to the Eastern League. See how you like that. Because you ain't going on a plane anywhere in the Eastern League. So, yes, you had the racial issues. Some teams it went beyond that because, like you said, they wanted to win, but the talent level, no, for their era, for what they had, no, it was there.
Exactly. So I feel as though the 60s is like the first real decade where, we see stars that kind of resemble like, the stars that we talk about now. I mean, to me, when you get to Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, we've never seen anybody like these guys. But one thing I'm really excited about is I'm going to start introducing the characters for this rivalry, is that we're going to be talking about 2 teams in which there's no Oscar, no Jerry, no Wilt, and no Bill Russell. So this is great education for people. So I'm going to start out with the first one that gets drafted, the first main character, Gus Johnson in the 63-64 season. I'm sorry?
Hold on. What about Dick Barnett?
Oh, okay. We can go to Dick Barnett. Yeah, Dick Barnett was at this time he was on the Lakers, right? Oh no, Nationals first.
He went to the Nationals. Yeah.
But Dick Barnett goes back farther than that. He was a 2 or 3 time national champion, black college champion at Tennessee State. Phenomenal college player, probably one of the top 5 players in the country at the time. And then he went to the ABL, which was the league in 60, 61, something like that. And proving again how good he was, his team won the title coached by Bill Sharman.
Wow, how many
So
titles
the
does
name
that guy have?
Yeah, that dude won. You know, he probably beat you playing checkers. I mean, that dude won everything, everywhere.
Yes,
But
he
anyway,
did.
Dick Barnett, one of the most unique players you'll ever see. His jump shot, there's never been another one like it in 70 years. He tucked his legs up under his butt.
Time Machine episode 3 for the Dime Dropper fans. It's there, episode
Watch
3.
it, because you can't until you see it, you cannot believe that, number one, a guy ever shot like that, and number two, a guy was an all-star, borderline Hall of Famer shooting like that and shot lights out.
So it was like when we saw Clyde Drexler do something like that.
Yeah.
No. Even more like it's weird.
Even
He's
more
like,
pronounced.
He's like he kicks his legs. It's very interesting.
He tucks both of his legs up under his ass in the air and falls back. You can call it fall back
baby.
Yeah,
back,
did Chick coin that?
I think Dick.
I'm not sure.
I think that was Dick who said it. It might have been Chick Hearn. But anyway, Dick Barnett then went to the Lakers, and that's where he really made his name, playing alongside Jerry West. And Jerry West, to this day, and he has told me this personally more than once, that he is still pissed off that they traded Dick Barnett. That was his guy. That was his partner. And he's a serious ball player. And that really hurt the Lakers when they traded him. It was a bad deal. I think they got Bob Boozer, who played like a year for them.
Yeah, and I think the reason why they got Bob Boozer, looking back, is because Elgin Baylor was going through really serious injury problems at the time and was going to miss a lot of that season. And they got Boozer, I think maybe as like a panic move, I think.
I think you're right. And so Barnett, Dick Barnett is the lost guy in this whole rivalry. He brought it every night. He played defense. He was smart. He was the veteran on the Knicks team. He was the only veteran on that team, the only older guy. And he was the starting guard for this entire 69, 70, 71. He was there every game doing his thing, guarding Earl, getting 20 a game. So Dick Barnett would be the first guy, and a very important and lost guy, and shouldn't be.
I guess I should. So there's one of them. Yep. And now I want to go to Gus now, because the Barnett trade happened a little bit after Gus and them got drafted. So at this time, I guess if we're going chronologically, Dick Barnett in 63, 64 is still on the Lakers. But now the Baltimore Bullets, who are now in Baltimore, so in 61, 62, this franchise was the Chicago Packers. They were the 9th team. Then they moved and became the Chicago Zephyrs. I'm sorry, they didn't move, but they just rebranded.
They didn't move, right.
Zephyrs for 62, 63. And then 63, 64, they moved to Baltimore and become the Baltimore Bullets. And in comes Gus Johnson, a 6'7", 225-pound, like god-looking guy from Akron, Ohio, which is like, it sounds familiar talking about a jack of all trades from Akron, Ohio. Doc, I'm going to let you take this one. Gus comes into a very bad Baltimore team in the beginning, and just tell us about Gus Johnson.
Yeah. Some background on Gus before you even get to Baltimore. And Gus was a teammate, and Gus was always a man among boys, like you're saying. He's actually 6'6", 235.
Wow.
All muscle, Greek god. But Gus was a teammate of Nate Thurmond, same high school team in Akron.
Wow.
Then he went to play junior college for 2 years, and then he went to Idaho, and then he turned pro. Now, back to Ohio. All through high school, he had heard about a guy from Middletown who was also a Hall of Famer named Jerry Lucas, and they used to go at it. And Jerry Lucas actually, his squad beat Akron, the high school team in Akron, for the state title. To this day, people will tell you that Jerry Lucas feared Gus Johnson. And anytime he went against Jerry Lucas, they said he always had a little something extra in the tank, a little extra elbow, a little extra shoulder, or what have you. But let's fast forward to Baltimore. He came in as this phenom, over the rim type guy, power type guy, shattering backboards and rims. I'll tell a story at another time about when he tried to take one over Wilt Chamberlain. All-star, betrayed though by his knees, and that was part of the issue. That kind of, even though he still made the Hall of Fame and what have you, still got a championship ring later. That was in his later years when he was brought in by Slick Leonard in Indiana. But he was a man among boys, and any accolades that he gets, it's not exaggerated.
So Gus averaged, so to this point, I guess from 63 to 71, we're recovering. He averaged over 16 points and over 11 rebounds every single season he played. Great defender. The film, he can handle the ball. He has these really flashy passes.
Yep.
He's extremely unique. So that's a centerpiece for Baltimore. And 64-65, the Bullets were still in the Western Division, and they lost in the division finals to Jerry West, who averaged 46 points in the division finals without Elgin Baylor to knock them out, which was amazing. But now we shifted over to the New York side. In the 64 draft, they draft a special player from Grambling, and that is Willis Reed.
Yes, sir.
Fabian, I want to ask you, what did you hear about Willis Reed? Well, I guess mostly the coming back from injury and all that, but I want to go to Jason after that though. Willis Reed, I mean, sharp shooter, strong, great rebounder. Just did he win Rookie of the Year?
I think so.
I think he won Rookie of the Year.
I think he did. Yeah.
The Knicks were very, by the way, I want to tell the audience though, the Knicks were not good when he first got there, like at all. Like this was coming off Richie Guerin, jumping Johnny Green. They weren't a playoff team or anything like that. So give us the scoop on Willis, Jason.
Well, first off, we'll go ahead and there's one of the original Willis Reed books. Still have it, 1971. I mean, he was a guy that was a star down at Grambling. So another, like Dick Barnett, all-black school. But unlike Barnett, he was a big guy. So people took notice of him because in those days, you had that big guy. Mm-hmm. The league was all about big guys. He was 6'9", built kind of like Gus Johnson. Absolute stud. But I think the key to Willis Reed was he had the softest jumper, about up to maybe 18, 20 feet, but about 15 to 18 feet, the guy was money. Left-handed, which also helps, I think, but absolute silky jump shot. Very athletic, unbelievably strong, and famous for maybe being the best fighter in the league. He cleaned out the
when he beat up the whole Laker team. Oh my God, we're gonna put that clip in.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, again, it was a man's league, right? You came in there, you got tested. That was the thing about the NBA in those days. They tested your manhood. They would elbow you, they would hit you, they would grab your shorts, and they wanted to see how you reacted.
Right.
And if they could get to you, and how tough you really were. Some guys were not that tough, and it cost them. He was as tough as they come. So it didn't take but a year for people to figure out, okay, we can't really mess with this guy. And the Knicks needed somebody like that. The problem for Reed was that he was on a team with Walt Bellamy.
Yep.
Yes.
And Bellamy got traded in 65-66 early in the season.
Right, to the Knicks.
Yes.
And Reed had played center his rookie year and loved it, and that was his natural position. And
he did win Rookie of the Year, by the way. I just checked. He did win Rookie of the Year.
Yeah,
great.
And he had a great year. And then they bring in Bellamy, who was a great player, but that pushes Reed to forward. And the next 2 or 3 years, very frustrating for him and for the Knicks. They did not fit well together. But it was a big man's league, and the Knicks looked at it wrong, and they thought, well, we got these two great big guys, but it didn't work. And Reed had to play forward. He wasn't quick enough for some guys, like a Gus Johnson was a little quicker than Reed, could take him a little bit. So it was very frustrating for Willis. He was still extremely effective, all-star level player, but he was out of position.
Yeah.
And it was a big issue. And so, I mean, the key to the Knicks, and if we want, we could jump ahead, but the Knicks made a trade in '69 where they got rid of Walt Bellamy and Howie Comides, who was a starting guard, white guy. And that allowed Reed to go to center. They put Debusschere at power forward, and they put Walt Frazier in the starting lineup. They proceeded to win 15 of the next 16 games and just rolled through the league that year because then they had the right guys in the right places. And once Reed went back to center, he began dominating. So absolutely dominant player.
So
inside and out.
66-67 was the only year that Bellamy and Reed – actually, no, they made the playoffs twice together. 66-67, they lost to the Celtics in 4 games, 3-1. And then in 68, lost to the Philadelphia 76ers, 3-1.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a guy now from your side, Doc, Baltimore side, coming in 66, Jack Marin. Not many people know about him. White guy, forward, could score. And he really matched up with Bill Bradley, who I know was big time at Princeton coming in the next year. But give us the scoop on Marin and Bradley.
Man, let me tell you something. You talked about, Jason talked earlier about Barnett getting lost in the mix. Jack Marin gets lost in the mix, big time.
Yes.
So Jack was at Duke. Jack was actually, I lived in Pittsburgh as well. I think I might have told you. Jack is a legend up there in Pittsburgh in the WPIL, Western Pennsylvania, at a high school called Farrell in Sharon, PA. Great player, legendary there, and then went on to Duke. All-American at Duke. The year that they had the big game that I written about and I wrote about again, actually, with Kentucky losing to Texas Western with all of the brothers and 5 brother starters. Duke almost made it to that final. They had an all-white squad too. It just didn't have the venom coming from Adolph Rupp, but that's not here nor there. Marin goes into the league and he's everything that he's supposed to be, particularly at the small forward and particularly in playoff time. He came up big. He was also a fighter too. If you look over the data, you see that he got into a lot of fights. But smooth jumper, left-handed, and he's been an all-star. He really came into prominence in the 71, not to jump too far ahead, but the year that Baltimore finally broke through and beat the Knicks in Game 7. He averaged 28 and maybe 3 assists, something along those lines. But he was the go-to guy. Earl's knees were hurting. Wes was for the boards, and Gus was hurting. And he just kind of took over. In his next season, I think may have been his best. And then to tell you how good this guy was, as we talk about guys who get lost in the shuffle, Jack Marin was traded for Elvin Hayes, who was an established star from the jump, straight up. It was no, I'm going to give you draft picks and cash and this, that, and the other, and another player. It was straight up. So he was a good one, and he was a vital part of those battles.
One other thing about Jack Marin is, if anybody ever sees him on tape, he had a birthmark.
Yeah.
He was, as a kid, I was young watching. I'd never seen anybody in public. He had a huge birthmark that went all across his chest and all the way down one side of his arm. It was the biggest, this big red birthmark. It was crazy looking. I mean, you looked at this guy, you're like, what? I've never seen anybody look like that. And he's out there playing basketball in the basketball jersey. You can see the whole thing. He was the strangest looking white guy in the whole league by far. He's one of the strangest. There's never really been another guy like that.
No. A shout out to him. One thing I forgot. Jack Marin on the political side. Jack Marin, sort of like John Roach. He was for the ABA. He also became an attorney. But he became an attorney in sports law. And he's done a ton representing players, particularly from the NBA Retired Players Association. And he's represented guys overseas who were playing ball. So he's giving back to the game. And in my opinion, he's just a legend that's gotten lost. But if you ask me, I'm not going to let you lose him. I'm going to talk and then say good things about him. That's 100% fact.
Yeah.
Great segue with the political thing to former Senator Bill Bradley. Great player at Princeton. And make I want to keep it a little bit shorter with Bradley because I want to get into the series. But any small thing on Bill? Dollar Bill?
The most important thing is he was the hype around him was insane.
Really?
Insane. He was supposed to be the greatest white player anybody had ever seen.
Wow.
And then he ends up going to England to be a Rhodes Scholar and doesn't play for 2 years because he's so smart. He's going to be a Rhodes Scholar. When he came back to the Knicks, his nickname was Dollar Bill because he made such a big contract, because it was such a big deal that this guy was finally going to show up in the NBA. And what happened to him, unfortunately, is, and again, the Knicks screwed it up. They played him at guard, and he was too slow.
Mm-hmm.
In his first year, he struggled big time, and got his butt kicked and got booed in the Garden over and over again, and had a really, really tough year because he had to play guard and he couldn't do it. He struggled. He was a little bit like a Havlicek. He ran around the court all the time, never stopped moving. Super smart player, beautiful jump shot, just a great shooter. Also, all he did was shoot his whole life. Good passer, good defender for what he was, but super smart player. And anyway, when Cazzie Russell got hurt, Bradley got in 69 that same year and into the starting lineup, and then that team took off.
So he was like a sixth man when he first came.
He was a sixth man because he couldn't play guard, and they had Cazzie Russell, who was great, college player of the year, #1 pick, and he beat Bradley out, and so Bradley was the backup. And then when Cazzie went down, Bradley came in, and he didn't get back out. Once he was in, he was in. He's a good ball player. He was never, what he was supposed to be, but that was mostly hype. He was just a really, really, really good player.
Fabian, what you got?
To break my silence, when I was watching the Garden was Eden, Walt Frazier says that the only other time he saw a hype like that, like a Bill Bradley hype, was Jeremy Lin. And just like Jeremy Lin, it was almost like he didn't reach the hype. So when I heard that, I was like, wow, there's certain things that relate to each other. Going back to the competitive thing with Willis Reed, Marv Albert says the only other competitive player he's ever seen as competitive as Willis Reed, what he said was Michael Jordan.
Wow.
There you go.
I've heard that before.
Yeah. Well, Willis was the captain, and if you talk to any of the Knicks, and I have, that played with him, they talk about him like kind of like guys talk about Jordan. They just have this look on their face because he played hurt all the time. He got shot up in his leg and his knee all the time. The needles were like 2 feet long. This was a long time ago. This dude was a gamer, and he was the captain. I mean, he was the guy. He had your back. If anybody messed with you, they were going down. And Willis just brought it, and he had to play against Wilt and Russell and Embry and Bellamy and Thurman every night. And his game matched up because he had that jump shot. So he took guys outside, and he was incredibly effective because he could play inside. He was physical, but then he had that jumper. So he was the man. I mean, he was the captain. He was the leader of that team. He was the heart and soul, absolutely, of that Knicks team.
So 67-68, the Knicks lose in 6 games to the 76ers. I may have said 4 games. They lost in 6 games. That was the rookie year of the 2 guys that maybe ended up being the most iconic of all these players. Earl the Pearl Monroe from Winston-Salem and Clyde Frazier from Southern Illinois. I mean, what can we even say about these 2? I guess I want to start with Doc with Pearl. I mean, he's amazing. And he won Rookie of the Year that first year, if I'm not mistaken, in 67-68. So he got the Rookie of the Year. And then 69, actually, I guess go for Monroe and Unseld. What them coming to Baltimore do for for the team, because everything changed in 68-69 when Wes Unseld gets there.
Yeah, it was Earl came in and you could believe the hype. Earl put up some magnificent numbers. I can't remember if that was the year when he came out of Winston-Salem, if he scored 56 or not. But he lived up to the hype. But when the squad took off, it was when Wes Unseld arrived and was throwing that outlet.
68-69 season.
Yeah, 68-69, who also became only the second guy to win Rookie of the Year and MVP that year. They didn't follow through in the playoffs, but Wes gave them the unique type of center where he wasn't ball dominant. He was going to get it off the glass. He was going to get it on the follow-ups, but that outlet kind of set it off. That outlet pass where he could get it, spin, and toss it, and it was you and Kevin Loughery go get it. And so, Earl brought the flash and the flair. The workmanship was Unseld, and it was magical, and it was magical for quite some time. The thing on Unseld, though, everybody respected him as an All-American. Oh, he's going to be great, and this, that, and the other. But everybody to a man will tell you he was highly regarded, but no one in their right mind predicted he would be as good and as valuable as he was.
Yeah. I mean, and as you said, the Rookie of the Year and MVP the same year, only other player besides Wilt Chamberlain to do that. In 69, Clyde, as Jason alluded to. Oh, okay. Yeah. I was going to say, as Jason alluded to, the Dave Debusschere trade that sent Bellamy and Howie Comives to Detroit gave Clyde even more room to do his thing. He increased his scoring average by 8 points in the 68-69 season, and the Knicks were 35-11 after the trade. The Baltimore Bullets, surprisingly, though, got the #1 seed. Knicks got the 3rd seed. I guess we'll go to Clyde, and then we'll go get into this matchups. But I know Clyde's one of your guys, one of your favorites, as he is mine.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing about Earl, though. I mean, there's so much to talk about here. I know Doc kept it short. He was the playground superstar.
Yeah.
Earl Monroe his nickname was, he had a lot of them. Black Jesus was the big one.
Yeah.
When he showed up, hundreds and hundreds of people would come to the playground. He was the guy. He was the most creative dribbler and one-on-one player anybody had ever seen. Coming into the league, he was the guy to bring. The first guy he brought the spin dribble.
Yeah, he was over both shoulders. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, this was a unique, flashy, superstar one-on-one player. He was the guy. And so he's a very, very special person in NBA history because he was really unique. And he came in and he put asses in the seats. The year he came in, nobody went to the Bullets games. Nobody. And when Earl came, and I just read something recently about this, they averaged like double.
Wow.
Because as soon as they saw Earl, and like Doc said, the hype was real. He came from a black college. A lot of people hadn't heard of him. And they picked him really high. It was very controversial. And then he started wheeling and dealing immediately. They're like, oh, we got to go see this guy. We got to go pay the $3 or the $5 because this guy's worth the price of admission. And he was. He was a special, special player. So the Knicks happened to have a guy to guard him. And that was Walt Frazier, who was kind of underrated, came from Southern Illinois, kind of a small university. And he made his name by winning the NIT in 1967. And people should know that the NIT in those days was not quite equal to the NCAA tournament, but really close.
Yes, sir.
Really close. And it was in New York, which was absolutely the mecca of basketball. And so to win the NIT was a big, big deal. It was in the Garden, and he was the MVP. And that was the first time really on the national stage that people went, wait a minute, who's this guy? This guy can play. And the Knicks had a lot of guards, and Clyde did not think the Knicks would draft him because they were loaded with guards, and they took him anyway. And he did not play that much as a rookie. And again, you asked in the very beginning, what was the league like? Another thing about the league in the 60s was rookies didn't play. Period. Yep. I mean, maybe 5 rookies a year got time, and then a few others after that. You had to earn it. And the coaches and GMs did not put the rookies in the game. They just didn't play. And so even a guy like him, he played, weird minutes.
He didn't start at all in '68. He didn't start at all.
I don't think so.
Okay.
No. Maybe no. I don't think he did.
I don't remember him being a starter. Yeah.
No, he struggled. But anyway, the next year he stepped it up, and then when they made the trade, he just took over. He had the ball. They said, "Okay, it's your team. You're the man," and he was ready. Remember, these guys played 4 years of college. They were men, very different. That's also important to know. If you're in your second year in the NBA now, you're usually 20.
Right.
No, I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
He's
right. No, it's true.
You're 20. Walt Frazier in his second year was 25 or 24. So, these are men, and they're ready physically, and he was ready. And Walt Frazier, to me, is one of the greatest guards in the history of the game. He was the greatest defender of his era by far. It's not close. He was the most clutch player in Knick history. That's not close.
I love it.
And he took over games. This is another thing that I enjoyed then and I watch for now. He's the guy that used to set guys up. He'd take it easy the first half and watch guys' tendencies and see what was going on because it was a close game, but whatever. And in the fourth quarter, he'd pick his spots and make a couple, 2 or 3 huge steals, lead right to a layup, break your back.
No, yeah, and the film checks out too. He does, every time the Knicks are in a 50-50 game, he takes over. It's unreal. It's like really crazy.
It's unreal. He was such a smart, clutch player, knew how to compose himself. He was always under control. I know that every kid growing up in New York, we all wanted to play like him. We all wanted to be as cool as him on and off the court. He was the coolest guy in the league by far. Wasn't even close with the outfits and what have you. So he was the guy. And in New York, there was Joe Namath, and then there was Clyde. And then Clyde went past Joe Namath, I think, pretty easily. But and I will say, Doc said something. I have to tell the story, but he said, you would see guys around Baltimore. It was a different time. You would see guys. They were out in the community. And when I was a kid, one day in my neighborhood, one of my friends came running, and we were out playing ball in the street. I think we were playing basketball. And my friend came over, he said, Clyde's here, Clyde's here, Clyde's here. And we all went, what? And he said, yeah, he's right around the corner. So we just dropped the ball, ran off the playground, ran around the corner, and there's his Rolls Royce.
Wow.
Sitting at some, I think it was a dry cleaners, they were all little mom and pop stores then. And it was like Upper West Side of New York. And we're just standing there, our jaws are on the floor, and Clyde wasn't there. And there's like 3 or 4 kids standing by the car. So we go up to these kids, I'm like 10. And we're like, what's going on? They say, Clyde's inside, Clyde's inside. We're like, well, what are you doing? Well, we're guarding the car.
I love it, man.
And so my friend, he goes, can we guard the car with you? And he's like, yeah, sure. So we all positioned ourselves around the car, like made like a ring around the car. There's like 15 little kids standing around the car, Rolls Royce, which nobody has ever seen that, right? Like a burgundy Rolls Royce with the Clyde license plate. And we're all just standing there. And then about 5 minutes later, he comes out, of the thing, and he's got one of his outfits on. He's got the hat on.
Wow.
And it's like, we just wanted to drop dead. It's like, are you kidding me? It's real. It's him. And he comes out and he starts laughing because these 15 kids, and he looks at the one kid who I guess he had talked to. He said, oh, so you hooked it up. You got a crew. And the kid is like, that's right. He goes, I told you I was going to guard your car, man. I had your back, Clyde. And Clyde's like, you know what? I love playing in New York City. And he goes and puts his stuff in the car, and he's like, comes around and he high five, or not high five. He didn't do that then. He gives the soul handshake. All of us, we start lining up.
That's
awesome. He bends over and he gives everybody the soul handshake and a pat on the back. And he's like, y'all Knicks fans, right? We're like, oh, Clyde, you're the man. He's like, okay, just got to support the Knicks. We'll see you guys later. And he goes, by the way, thanks for the car. Appreciate it.
Wow. That's amazing.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Got it. I never ever forgot. I told him that when I met him as a writer, and he got this big smile on his face. He goes, that's not the only time that happened.
Jeez.
That was a humble brag.
Yeah, well, he was Clyde, man. It was his city. And he said he used to do that because he goes, look, I was out in the city doing stuff, and whenever I'd pull up somewhere, stuff would happen. So I'd always try to grab a kid and say, hey, can you watch my? And they're like, oh yeah, I'll do it.
That sounds like if anyone who's younger, my age or younger, it sounds like Allen Iverson for our generation. Like if we were to see AI in the street, it'd be like, oh my God. Joe, just to clarify the 56-point game, Earl The Pearl did score that against the Lakers in February of 68, and he was drafted in 67. So I think he did have a pretty good rookie year. Yeah,
he had an unbelievable rookie year. He was the talk of the league because he was the one. He was the Iverson, if you want to say that, of the league in that way too. He was the unstoppable new offensive player. Like, what is this guy doing? This guy is an offensive genius. We've not seen these moves. Nobody knew what to do with him. I mean, he was that guy.
Oh, so he had so that's a combination, right? That maybe because AI did. I always tell these kids now, like Dime is the one who really. That's why I'm really proud to even be cool with him. He really enforces and talks about this. The way they dribble now was not allowed to. So Frazier and Earl The Pearl were doing this magic.
They definitely started pushing it a little bit. Like when I saw them dribble, I'm like, okay, this is a little different than the early '60s for sure. They're
right. Then it goes to Magic Johnson. Then it goes, and then eventually Allen Iverson. And now it's just I don't even know who. Kyrie and Steph are taking it to another level.
69 season. Earl The Pearl Monroe and Gus Johnson and Wes Unseld, they're all on the All-Star team. Earl's on the All-Star team, but Clyde doesn't make it that year because, as you said, he didn't really get his shot till that trade, and it really took off for him. The Bullets get the #1 seed. So the Celtics for the first time, and the Sixers, obviously Wilt just got traded. So the Sixers and the Celtics, well, the Sixers are a little bit worse, but they're the 2nd seed. The Celtics barely make the playoffs. The Baltimore Bullets get the #1 seed with their MVP rookie, Wes Unseld, and then, of course, their big three, Kevin Loughery, who we haven't even mentioned, is the 5th guy on this team, starter, 22 points a game this season. And so they play the Knicks in round 1.